Alright, hey everyone! Today I'm going to be doing a cooking video for Halloween food. Now, if you're anything like me, you are pretty upset that this year we're not going to really be able to do much for Halloween. If you can't tell, I kind of like Halloween. But this year there's going to be no real trick-or-treating, no big Halloween parties, no walking down at Waikiki in costume, no nothing like that. So I wanted to do a video about how we could cook for Halloween and have just a meal with our family that's still Halloween themed and still get to celebrate and still have a good time. So today I'm going to be making six dishes, yes, 2 of which are desserts because Halloween you get a lot of candy on and we don't get that this year. Now, I know that not a lot of you have special pans or anything like that that's really fun shape, or even cookie cutters or whatnot, and that's totally fine. I know most people don't have those. I do because I'm crazy. But I will not be using any of those today. Everything I'm going to be using is going to be standard stuff that you should already have or will be really easy to get. Same with the ingredients. I'm not going to get something that you can only get at some weird shop in a weird area of town. It's just going to be stuff that you can get at your standard store. So let's have fun. Alright, so the first recipe that we're going to be starting with on our Halloween morning is going to be meringue ghost cookies. They're not necessarily that hard, but they do take a while to do. You have to have the oven at a low temperature, but for quite a while. So it's better to get this started and out of the way so that you can do the rest of all of your prep work and whatnot while this is in the oven and cooling and everything like that, and then you can start on everything else. So these are you're going to start off with preheating up your oven to 200 degrees Fahrenheit and lining a baking sheet with either parchment paper or like a silicone mat or whatever you happen to have. So the first step to your meringue cookies is going to be to separate out 4 eggs. You need the egg whites. The egg yolks you can just keep and use them later in whatever you want. Personally, I like to scramble them up, put them on some bread with some cheese. It's really yummy, but do whatever you want with them. If you want an omelet or scrambled eggs, that's fine. I cannot show you how to separate the eggs because I have but 2 hands and both are required for separating the eggs, but I will show you the aftermath of this. So you want to be careful not to get any shell or any yolk in there. I know certain things, it's okay if you get a little bit of yolk in to your separated egg, but in this case, if you get any yolk in there, they're not going to set up right, and honestly, they're just not going to turn out at all. So, gotta be careful not to get that in there. Obviously, you don't want any shell either, because let's be honest, who likes crunching down on something that's not supposed to be that crunchy? It's just not that fun. Here are our egg whites, and here are our egg yolks. I'm just going to put those in the fridge so that I can use those later in whatever I happen to want. So once you have your eggs separated, the next thing you're going to do is add in half a teaspoon each of cream of tartar and vanilla extract. If you use just your regular brown vanilla extract, which I'm gonna guess most of you have, and what I have, frankly, it's gonna be a little bit off-white once you bake them, but they do sell clear vanilla extract, but again, I'm not buying that special just for this one instance, and just plain vanilla extract is fine. Your ghosts just aren't gonna be as pure white. Once you've added those in, you're going to beat your egg whites really hard. With an electric mixer is better. You can do this by hand, but your arms will be so very tired at the end of it, and it will take you so very long. So if you have an electric mixer, please use it, just to save yourself. So we're going to beat them until they are frothy before we add the sugar. I'm not going to film this part. It's going to be loud, but I will show you what they look like once they're frothy. Alright, we have achieved frothy egg whites. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to gradually add the sugar while we are increasing the mixer speed to a kind of medium high. And I forgot to mention, but you're going to be making them frothy with just about a medium speed. So once again, it's going to be difficult to show you because this requires, 2 hands, but I'll try my best. So you're going to take 3/4 of a cup of just your standard granulated sugar, and you're going to gradually add that to your egg whites while you mix. And you're going to keep mixing until you get stiff peaks, about 6 minutes. Again, I'll show you that because I can't really show you this part. Alright, so here's what our egg whites look like now. This is another reason I wasn't too concerned about using regular vanilla. See how white it is? So we've got nice stiff peaks. So what we're going to do now is we're going to transfer it to either a piping bag if you have one, or just a regular old Ziploc bag with the tip cut off if you don't have piping bags. Another note is if you are going to use a plastic bag instead of a piping bag, get one with an edge like this, just a regular straight edge, because if you get one like this where the edge can expand out like that, you're going to end up cutting 2 holes in it, and meringue will spurt from both of the holes, which you do not want. It will be a massive pain. So this, good. Just one single, yeah. This, where it's expandable or, easy to stand or anything, it's going to be a pain. Don't do it. Alright, once you have your meringue into whatever bag, piping bag, plastic bag you're going to use, you will simply pipe little swirls on there. Now, you can make them bigger if you want, but that may affect the baking time a bit. You want to make them big enough where you can actually decorate them too. I'm in a bunch of different designs too, if you want to do a more like that and have more of a double layer. Or you can just do a swirl like I was doing. Either way will work. Just depends on what you want them to look like. If you do have a piping bag and a piping tip, you can also always do a different tip and make it have a different design on the outside. Really, this part's up to you. Now, in the recipe that I'm going to put in the description and everything, or I'm going to send to everybody, it does say to use candy eyes. I personally am going to not do that, and I'm just going to use black icing after they're done. I find that then you can make a mouth and everything as well, rather than just having the eyes on there. And, a little more customization. It's really fun. So once you have them all piped onto the tray, and yours will probably make more than this because while I cut between filming, I managed to spill a massive amount of meringue. So don't do that. But if you do, life happens, right? But once it is all on your tray and everything like that, you're going to put them in your preheated oven for 1.5 hours until they're dry and crisp. And then what you're going to do is just turn off the oven and allow them to continue drying in the oven for a few hours. Now, because we're doing so much other stuff, that may get a little tricky. So when I have to put in the next batch, I'm going to instead move these to the warming drawer underneath the oven, but I'll show you when I do that. Alright, so this next part is going to be the hardest part of anything that we're doing today. We're going to be making the sugar glass for the broken glass cupcakes. Please be careful when you're doing this. The sugar will get very, very hot. If you have a candy thermometer, I would recommend that you use it right now. If you don't, and I know most people probably won't, there is a way to tell how hot everything is, and I will definitely show you how to do that. But please be careful. This is going to be extremely hot, and I don't want you to burn yourself, especially since it does stick to your skin and will be very, very hard to get off. So just watch what you're doing, and if, God forbid, you do get a little bit on yourself, rinse it off in cold water quick. Just do that right away. Don't want you to hurt yourself. For the sugar glass, we are going to combine 2 cups of water, 1 cup of light corn syrup, a 1/4 teaspoon of tartar sauce, or cream of tartar sauce, not tartar sauce, oh my goodness, that would be a different flavor, and 3.5 cups of just plain white sugar. Once that's all in there, you can just give it a bit of a mix just to kind of combine everything first, but you're going to want to do this in a saucepan because you're going to want to put it directly onto the stove and bring it to a boil. Now this is the part that gets a little bit tricky because you have to bring it up to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, which is also called hard ball consistency, and they call it that because if you drop a little bit of it into some cold water, it'll form a hard sugar ball. They also have soft ball consistency where just the same thing, you drop it into a little bit of cold water and it forms a very soft, squishy sugar ball. But in this case, we want it to be hard ball consistency so that it actually sets up into a glass type consistency eventually. So we've got it on our stove over here, and we're just going to turn it up onto a high setting and wait for it to go. And I'm going to put my candy thermometer in here just to have a double check on everything, but again, I will make sure that I let you guys know when it reaches that consistency and show you how to check. Oh, and I forgot to mention earlier, you're going to want to be stirring this constantly, otherwise it will burn to the bottom. And trying to get burned on sugar syrup off of the bottom of a pot is darn near impossible. You have to soak it so long to get the sugar to dissolve. It's just such a massive pain. So stir it consistently, otherwise you're going to have a much bigger cleanup at the end that no one wants to deal with. Alright, so we're getting close, and I just put it in the really cold water, and it's in a very soft ball sort of stage. This is actually the sugar syrup once it's in a cold water. It's still malleable and everything, but it's definitely holding a shape now. So we're getting closer, right according to the thermometer and everything. So it may take a little bit of time. It does depend on your stove as well. Sometimes they run hot, sometimes they run cold, and you know, your pot and everything like that. So, you know, be patient, it'll get there. It just may take a little while. And as you can probably see, it's a darker color because a lot of the water has evaporated off, and it's definitely a thicker consistency. It's not nearly so just watery, liquidy. Alright, we are almost at 300 degrees, and I'm gonna put some of this in my water. There we go. It instantly solidified into a hard ball. So we are going to turn off the heat, and we're going to instantly pour it into this sheet pan right here. Be careful, it's very, very hot, obviously. Please do not burn yourself. You're probably going to want to put a hot pad underneath, and when you do have to grab this, you're going to want to use hot pads because it is metal, and metal will transfer the heat quite well. Now that that's in there, you're going to want to make sure it's one layer across it, and you don't have one side higher than the other. So just get it all around in your pan. Make sure it's as flat as you can be. And then you're just going to leave it. That's all you have to do for this part of it. You're just going to set it off to the side and let it cool completely. It will take a while, but again, that's why we're doing this part earlier. It is quite warm, so don't touch it. And be careful, don't let anybody else touch it for a long time. But it'll cool, and then we'll be ready to break this up into shards once it's actually cooled. Sorry I couldn't show you this sooner, but had to act quickly. These are the shards that I dropped into the ice cold water. See, they're not really flexible. I can't push on them and move them. They're very, very firm and everything. So as soon as they hit the water, they just immediately solidified into whatever shape they happen to hit in. So that's how you tell that it is the correct temperature if you do not have a candy thermometer. Alright, next we are going to make the pie crust for our spinach pie, our spooky spinach pie, because this has to rest in the fridge for a while. Now, if you have a different recipe you'd like to use, you know, family recipe for pie crust, whatever, use that and maybe it won't have to rest as long. Or you can just use pre-rolled out pie crust, in which case ignore this and just skip to the next bit, and then you can just roll it out and put it in later. I am going to make the pie crust from scratch, but that's up to you. Alright, so for my pie crust, now this does make more than you will need for just this one spinach pie, but you can always make another pie later. It will keep for a few days, so feel free to just make this and then keep it for later. But first it's going to be 4 cups of flour, And I know in most cooking videos they have everything already pre-measured and weighed out and just in a little bowl, but I don't want to do that many dishes and I don't have that many small little bowls. So we're just going to have to measure it on screen. So 4 cups of flour, half a cup of water, 1 egg, 1 3/4 cups of Crisco. You can also use butter for that, but personally I prefer the Crisco. And a tablespoon of sugar. And finally, a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. Now, I always find it helpful to use a fork when breaking up the egg and mixing in the Crisco. You can use a spoon and everything. I just find that with the Crisco, it helps it break up into smaller pieces, and then you have an easier time of it later. So the meringues just beeped for the hour and a half, so I'm going to turn off the stove here, or the oven here, and just leave them in there. They're looking good. They just have to stay in there and stay drying out for a while. If they're still in there when I need to use the oven for the next bit, I will just put them in the warming rack underneath. Otherwise, just leave them in your oven to cool. These would actually be something that if you can make the day before, I would recommend making the day before, just because they do take so long and they will stay good until the next day. Just try and keep them in a place with low humidity and not overly hot. Room temperature is okay, but not in the sun. All right, for the next bit, we're gonna make the meatloaf mix. We're not gonna bake the meatloaf or anything like that yet because we want that to be nice and hot at dinner. But we can make the mix at least, and then it goes in the fridge and all the flavors will just come together really nicely and it'll taste really good if it sits in the fridge for a while. And then while it's sitting in the fridge, we can go on and make everything else. So we're gonna start off with melting our butter in a big saucepan to saute our vegetables. We're gonna start off by melting half a cup of butter in a big saucepan. And once that's all most of the way melted, we can go ahead and add our onions, celery, and I'm using zucchini because I don't like mushrooms, but mushrooms or eggplant or carrots or whatever you so choose. So it's 1.5 cups of onion, half a cup of celery, and depending, 8 ounces of mushrooms or whatever you choose. And we're also going to add in 1 teaspoon of salt. And we're going to go ahead and saute everything over a medium-high heat until everything starts to look kind of golden brown and some of the moisture has been absorbed by the salt so that we don't get too liquidy of a meatloaf going on. Alright, once you've been cooking that and sauteing that for a while and everything's starting to get a little bit golden brown around the edges, you can go ahead and add your spices. So you're going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper, a 1/2 teaspoon of dried thyme, you are going to also add some 1 whole teaspoon of black pepper. That's a 1/2 teaspoon and 1. And you are also going to add your minced garlic, 3 cloves of it. Now stir it all in, make sure everything is thoroughly coated. Now this will get a little bit more cooked in the meatloaf because we will be cooking it all, so don't worry if not everything looks quite there yet, but it will definitely be cooked. If you like your onions a bit softer and more cooked, you can always add the onions before you add anything else. Make sure that those are already on their way to cooking, maybe translucent, and then add everything else if you want it to. If you want to have really soft onions. I know some people don't like really firm onions. Once everything gets all mixed in there a bit, we're going to just turn off the heat and remove this from the heat. We're going to let it sit and cool to room temperature so that when we mix it into the meatloaf mix, we do not burn our hands. Alright, so next we're going to make the actual meatloaf mix. I've already put the 3 pounds of ground beef into the bowl. We are also going to add the remaining 2 teaspoons of the salt, the tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce, or however you pronounce that, let's be honest, who knows. 2 tablespoons of ketchup, and try to avoid knocking everything over like I just did, as well as 1 egg. And you're going to add 3/4 of a cup of plain dry bread. And finally, you are going to add 3 tablespoons of buttermilk. If you don't have buttermilk, you can also make your own buttermilk by combining some white vinegar and regular milk, or a couple other ways of doing it. I will link to, or I'll put a link in somewhere that tells you how to make it, because buttermilk is strangely hard to find on Oahu, and I don't know why. So once you've combined all that, you can add in your vegetable mixture. The other reason you want this cooled down a bit is because since you have an egg in there, you don't want to cook the egg when you add all your vegetables. So and then you're going to mix it all up. So you can get your hands in there. I prefer for this beginning part at least to kind of separate it without my hands, but I know that I'm probably going to have to put my hands in there and make a mess. So I will show you once it's all mixed up, because my hands will be dirty in a moment and I won't be able to control the camera. Alright, now that we have thoroughly washed our hands after touching raw meat, and because we should thoroughly wash our hands anyway, we are going to put it in a container, put a lid on it, and stick it in the fridge until we are ready to make the meatloaf. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to make the filling for the spinach pie that we are doing, that we already made the crust for. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get some butter melting in a big saucepan. And we are going to saute our onions in there. So we've got 3 tablespoons of butter in there right now. And then as soon as that gets more melted, we're going to add in our chopped onions. Now, I was able to get enough onions for both the spinach pie and for the meatloaf out of 1 rather large onion. If you like onions more, obviously feel free to add more. But that's just how it worked out for me. So hopefully it'll work out that way for you. You won't have to get so many onions, but you'll never know. I can't predict what size onion you're going to get. Alright, so once that is almost all the way melted, we can go ahead and add our onion. And this we're going to want to make sure that the onion is nice and tender before we do the next step, because otherwise you're just going to have some really hard chunks of onion in there, and I don't think people really like biting into that. Alright, once your onions are nice and tender and golden brown, you're going to put them off to the side for a moment there while I grab everything. So you're going to stir in the 2 tablespoons of flour, half a teaspoon of salt, and half a teaspoon of pepper. And you're going to let those cook for a little bit, and then you're going to add your spinach and everything. Alright, once everything's cooked out for a minute, you're going to add in your frozen, thawed, and drained spinach. You can use fresh spinach and cook it and chop it and everything yourself, but this is just so much easier to do rather than going to all that trouble, especially since, as you know, you get a mountain of spinach and you get practically nothing out of it. So this, you already know what you're getting, and you don't have to guess how much raw spinach is going to translate to how much cooked spinach. So we're going to cook this for just a minute longer, let everything kind of all come together before we go to the next step. So once we have the spinach cooked, we're going to set it off to the side for just a moment while we combine our cheeses and our 3 of the eggs. So we're not going to combine, I know the recipe calls for 4 eggs, but the 4th one is going to be used for for making the pie all nice and shiny and pretty, so we don't have to worry about that yet. So crack in 3 eggs, and then you're going to do 2.5 cups of shredded Italian cheese blend. You can shred this all yourself, obviously. It's a mix of like mozzarella, provolone, cheddar, assaggio, and romano. You can put whatever you really want in there if you have a real preference. Just for the sake of this video, I found this to be significantly easier just to grab the bagged stuff. I know it's not as good, but you know, we have to take shortcuts at some point. Alright, so that's about 2.5 cups. And then we're also going to do 2 cups of ricotta cheese. Alright, so once you have all that in there, you can just take the same spoon you were using and mix it all up together. Now you want to make sure your spinach mixture is cooled a little bit before you put it in here, otherwise, again, your eggs are just going to immediately cook. And I don't think any of us want that. You know, I like scrambled eggs, but not in this. So we want to make sure that the spinach mixture isn't hot enough to do that. So once you've got everything mixed, you can go ahead and add your slightly cooled spinach mixture. Alright, and once that's all mixed, you can just set this off to the side for the moment. Probably someplace that's not too warm. You don't want it right by your oven or anything like that. Fridge is probably not a bad idea, but you can just set it off to the side until you are ready to actually bake the pie, which will be in a little bit. We are about to start baking the spinach pie as well as the cupcakes because they both go in the oven at the same temperature. So take your ghost meringues out, and if they are nice and firm and you can kind of hear them when you tap on them, then they're fine. You can just leave them off to the side and decorate them later if you didn't already put the candy eyes on them. Or if they are not quite done or the oven's still a bit warm, my oven happened to be room temperature, so it's fine. That means they've cooled. But if your oven is still warm, you might want to put them in the warming rack or the warming drawer underneath your oven, just to make sure that they stay the way they're supposed to, at least until you're probably going to want to take them out part of the way through baking, but keep an eye on them. You don't want them to get overdone. Alright, so you're going to start with preheating your oven to 350 degrees, and you're going to get a pie pan, and you're going to want to spray it to make sure that the pie doesn't stick to it. Then you're going to take a lump of your pie crust, and I put it on some wax paper, floured it, then the pie crust, then put flour on top, and I'm going to put another piece of wax paper on top. It just helps keep things a little bit easier to clean up, and then if it sticks, you can just still lift it really easily, and it just makes life a lot easier. If you're using a pre-rolled pie crust or anything like that, it'll already be flattened. Just put it directly into the pie pan. But if you are using your own pie crust, roll it out, then put it into the... So once you have your pie crust in your pie pan, you're going to want to add the filling to it. Now that's just been sitting there for a while, so all the flavors are going to be nice and all melded together, and it'll taste delicious. All cheesy and spinachy and everything. And you want to get it as flat as you can now, because we're going to put a bit of a top on this to make it more Halloween themed, because let's be honest, right now this doesn't look super Halloweenish. So once you have it pretty flat, you can just put it off to the side for now, and you can use the same method of wax paper, bit of flour, and a bit of dough, more flour, and wax paper. So if you have any ghost cookie cutters or anything, you can of course use those and make it more Halloween themed. But if you do not, I'm just going to cut in the shape of a jack-o'-lantern. So I'm going to cut 2 triangle eyes and a big mouth and everything like that, and put those on top of the spinach pie. Alright, as you can see, we have a lovely jack-o'-lantern face on our spinach pie. So I'm actually going to put this off to the side for now. Oven still has to finish preheating a little bit. And I am going to make the red velvet cupcakes because they bake at the same temperature as the spinach pie, though for slightly different times, and it's just easier to put both of them in at the same time. Alright, so I'm about to start the red velvet cupcake mix. This is actually the only red velvet recipe that I personally have ever liked. If you don't like red velvet at all, feel free to do vanilla cupcakes dyed red or not dyed at all, chocolate, anything you want. I just chose red velvet because, I mean, it's red, it's Halloween, why not? So we're gonna start with that, and then they'll go into the oven at 350 along with spinach pie. You can use either cupcake liners or just really, really carefully butter and flour the inside of your cupcake tins. You can also do this as a cake if you would like, though obviously the baking times will change, so please be careful if you do that. Anyway, so as you can see, I've got butter and sugar in a bowl. That's 1.5 cups of sugar and half a cup of butter that's been softened. You don't want it completely melted, but if it's slightly melty, life happens. I'm going to beat them together until it's really light and fluffy. It should take about 5 minutes with this mixer. Again, you can do it by hand, but your arms will hurt at the end of it. So if you have an electric mixer, I really recommend using it. Alright, once you have it nice and light and fluffy, you're going to take 2 eggs at room temperature and beat them in one at a time, and you gotta make sure they're mixed in well after each one. Alright, then you are going to add the food coloring, the unsweetened cocoa powder, and the vanilla. So we need 2 tablespoons of unsweetened cocoa powder. We need a teaspoon of vanilla. And I know this is going to sound like a lot, and it is. 4 tablespoons of red food coloring. Now, if you don't have 4 tablespoons, just do what you can. It just won't be quite as red. Alright, so once all of your red food coloring and everything is mixed in, you're going to add 1 teaspoon of salt into 1 cup of buttermilk. Give it a little bit of a mix there. And then you're going to add it to this mix. You're also going to add the flour, just a bit at a time. You need just over 2 cups, 2 1/5 cups. I've got the exact measurement in the directions, but we'll just go with a bit over 2 cups of cake flour. You can use regular flour. It will change the consistency a little bit, but it'll be all right. All right, so once you've gotten most of the batter all done, you're going to take your apple cider vinegar, and you're going to take 1 teaspoon. Then you're also going to take a teaspoon of baking soda, and you're going to combine them in a separate container just so that they can get reacting for a moment before you add it to the actual rest of the batter. Ooh, nice and frothy. And into the batter. Alright, once you have everything mixed, you can start putting the red velvet mix into your cupcake liners. Now, I'm just using an old ice cream scoop. You can just use a spoon or anything. This just helps it be a bit more consistent, and since it's got the little thing that scoops it out for you, it makes it a little bit easier. Alright, so this is going to make about 24 cupcakes, so I'm going to put all these in the oven along with the quiche. They're probably going to, they're going to have to go on different shelves just because of space. So once they are in the oven, so the cupcakes bake for about 22 minutes, while the spinach pie bakes in there for 45. So I'm going to set the timer for 22 minutes and check on that then. And when I take the cupcakes out, I will just add whatever remaining time to the timer and leave the spinach pie in there. If it looks like it needs to be moved to the other rack, I'll do that. It depends. The main thing is we just want to make sure everything's cooked. So when I check on the cupcakes, I'm going to poke them with like a toothpick or a small knife or something and make sure that it comes out cleanly. If there's still dough on it, it needs a few more minutes. The spinach pie doesn't really have the same kind of thing, but the crust should be a nice golden brown. I didn't put the egg wash on top of it. I generally don't think it's really necessary, but if you want it to be really shiny, really pretty, then you can go ahead and whisk up an egg and just brush it on top of your spinach pie. If you don't have a pastry brush or anything, just take a spoon and dip it in there and kind of rub it on top of it and it'll get the same kind of. All right, so we're gonna start the apple cider now. We're not gonna put it on the stove yet. What I'm gonna do is just put the maple syrup apple cider, everything that goes into it, into a pot that can go on the stove. That way, when it's a little bit later, I can start boiling it because it won't take that long to actually cook it all together. But I want it to be ready so that I'm not caught in the middle of taking everything out of the oven and trying to mix things together at the same time. And it'll help kind of the flavors to meld together a little bit more, and it'll just be delicious, you know? It'll have a little more orange, a little more cinnamon flavor. Obviously, you don't have to do this early if you are doing other things, but that's how I'm going to show you. All right, so as you can see, I have already put in the 4 cinnamon sticks and the peel of an orange. Now, I cut it up just so that it circulates a bit better, but I would guess you can leave it whole, but I would recommend cutting it up into just small pieces. Make sure that your orange peel is thoroughly washed and rinsed so that you don't get any sort of dirt or soap or just anything that you don't want on that orange peel in there. So then I'm going to add my gallon of apple cider, and I'm also going to add my half a cup of maple syrup. Now, thankfully, it is warm here, so the maple syrup is nice and runny. It comes out easily. All right, so once that is all, or now that that's all mixed, I'm just going to give it a quick stir. And then I'm just going to cover it and set it aside until I'm ready to actually put it on the stove and get it cooking. All right, these just came out of the oven. And you can see how clean that is when it comes out, which means that they are entirely done. Now, these have to cool before we can do any frosting or anything like that on them. Otherwise, the frosting will just melt on the top of it. All right, as you can see, I already broke up our broken glass, sugar glass for the cupcakes a bit. But how to do it, you take your trusty rolling pin, or you can also do a mallet if you have one for pounding meat or something like that. Just make sure it's all clean. And all you gotta do is stick it. And you see how it formed this new spider web of cracks. So then you can just take it out of there like that. If it's a big chunk, you can kind of just smack it a little bit and it'll break off shards and until you get the size that you want. I did forget to mention earlier, you can also put aluminum foil or do this on a silicone baking mat if that'll make your life easier. It'll probably make cleanup a bit easier, but this is just the way that I do. So you'll have little shards of broken sugar glass. They don't have too much of a flavor, they're just kind of sugary. They're a bit sticky, especially since it's humid. If we lived in some place that was colder and less humid, it would not be as sticky, I don't think, but working with what we have, it's a little sticky, but that's all right. It still tastes good. All right, so we're gonna start on the apple heads for the apple cider. These apples have all been peeled, halved, and had the cores and everything taken out of them because you don't want all the seeds. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to carve a face into them very, very carefully. You don't want to cut yourself with this or anything like that. So if there's any kids or anything that are attempting this, please let your parent do this or help you with it, or just be careful with it, please. I don't want to hear that I, caused someone to get their fingers cut. So there's one face you can do. just a little smiley face or whatever you want if you want to get more intricate with it. And then we're going to put these on a baking sheet for now. We're going to dip them in some lemon juice here in a minute to stop them from getting too brown, but for now we're just going to carve all these and then... Alright, well, while I was carving the apples, it came time for the spinach pie to come out of the oven. So that gets taken out. Now, with your apple skulls, so now that you have them all carved, you can go ahead and dip them into some of the lemon juice, just so that they don't go too brown. And you're going to want to reserve the lemon juice that you use to put in the apple cider afterwards. So just give them a good shake, make sure they're not dripping wet before you put them on the tray. And any that have little eyes, like this guy here, there we go, like this guy here, you can put whole cloves into its eyeballs so that he actually has eyes. See, now he can look at you. Hello. So we're just going to do that with all of these apples and put cloves in some of them, and then we're going to toss them in the oven. Now, as soon as the spinach pie came out, I turned down the oven temperature from 350 degrees to 250 degrees, because that's the temperature that these need to be baked at. And these will bake for about an hour and a half until the apples are dried and they're kind of browning around the edges. And then we'll take them out and we can float them in our apple cider. Alright, now that we have our meringues all nice and cool, that little ghosty meringues, it's time to actually decorate them and give them faces. So I'm just using some cookie icing here. You can use like some gel, or as I said, the little candy eyes or anything you want. This is just what I happen to find first and to be most convenient to me. So what you're going to do is you're going to grab one of them, not two. Pick whichever side you want, and then just dab this on there. And give him a face. And then you've got your little ghosty friend. Now just do that for all of them, and you'll... Alright, so we're going to start the witch's finger breadsticks now. So for this, it's going to take a while. It's got to rise for a bit, but thankfully during the rising time you can do other stuff, and already we have the apples in the oven and everything like that, so we're just, you know, using our time wisely. So we're going to start off with 1 cup of warm water and a 4-ounce packet of active dry yeast. And we're going to just add those together and let the yeast activate for a few minutes before we do much else. We want it to get a little bit foamy in the water and everything. Alright, I don't know if you can see how foamy it is, and unfortunately when I moved it, it kind of destroyed the foaminess of it. But we're going to start adding the flour, salt, sugar, and oil. So I'm going to start with, I mixed the flour, salt, and sugar all in this bowl so that I can just add it all at once. And we're just going to kind of add a little bit and stir it. And then got to make sure it's all mixed in there before I add the rest of it. And I'm going to add the oil as soon as I mix this in as well. Now, if you have any kind of stand mixer or anything like that, you can also use that with the dough hook. But I know that that's kind of a weird thing to have for a lot of people. So we're just going to do it with a spoon. Alright, so 1 tablespoon of just, it can be vegetable oil, canola oil, you know, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Add all that flour in. We're going to mix it real well until everything is incorporated, and then we're going to knead it for quite a while. 7 minutes is what this recipe... So this recipe, you actually knead it in the bowl, which I find very convenient, because otherwise you end up just making a bigger mess, and I'm all about keeping the mess to a minimum if at all I can. Not that you would know it after making all of this all day. Alright, once everything is incorporated, you're just going to get some regular flour, and you're going to want to sprinkle it on there, on your hands. Not too much, just a little bit, but otherwise it's just going to stick to your hands something fierce. And you're not going to be able to do anything with it because your hands will just be coated. So it's at the end of the kneading, it's going to be a sticky-ish dough, but it's not going to stick to your hands to the extent that it will right now. Alright, once you have kneaded for a while, you are going to just remove your dough from the bowl. Pour a little smidgen of oil in there. Just kind of spread it around the bottom and everything like that. You're gonna put your dough in there, rub it through the oil, and you are going to cover it with a clean towel and leave it to rise for about 45 minutes or until the dough has doubled in size. Alright, so we're going to start on the frosting now, and this frosting, it starts with a roux actually, which is flour and milk cooked together. So I've already got my 2 cups of milk in my saucepan, and we are going to whisk in 6 tablespoons of flour. And we want to make sure we're whisking it as we're going along so it doesn't get... Alright, once we have our 6 tablespoons in there and it's all whisked up, we're going to turn on our heat to medium, and we're going to keep stirring it so that it doesn't get lumpy over this heat until it gets thick and gets bubbly. It'll take about 10-15 minutes, and then we're going to just cover it with some wax paper and let it cool for a while. So this will be nice and thick and be a good base. Alright, now that this has thickened, and when I stop stirring for a moment, you can see it start to bubble. We're going to remove it from the heat. We're just going to get a piece of wax paper big enough to cover it, and we're going to cover the roux, but we have to make sure that the wax paper is actually touching the top part of the roux, otherwise it will form a weird skin on it that no one wants. So, be careful doing this because the roux will be hot, so don't put your fingers on it too long, just enough to get it so that it's touching the surface. And then you can just put it off to the side to cool to room temperature. And so now we're going to make the edible blood, which is pretty simple. So I've got half a cup of corn syrup in here, and I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of the cornstarch to it. You can see how thick that is by the fact that the cornstarch just sits on top. So once that's there, we're going to slowly stir in a 1/4 cup of water. If you need a little bit more to make it the right consistency, go ahead. Or a little bit less. The consistency is the most important part. You don't want it to be too runny, otherwise it's just going to run off your cupcakes. But you also don't want it to be too solid, because otherwise you're going to have a heck of a time pouring it on there. So you want it to kind of be, well, bloody consistency. You want to make sure you get all these lumps of cornstarch out. So once we've gotten it kind of mixed up a bit, we're going to add the food coloring. So it's 15 drops of red and 3 drops of blue. 15. You can always adjust it and add more if you want, but again, you cannot take it back. So better to start off with too little and then add. So you just kind of got to fiddle with it until it's the right color and right consistency and everything. And once you have it, then you've got your fake blood. So we're going to be shaping the breadsticks now, and our apple skulls actually just came out of the oven, so they're still quite warm, but here's what they look like now. They're a bit dried out, and they smell really good, especially with the ones with the cloves in the eyes. So next is going to be our breadsticks. Poof. It has risen to about twice its size, so what we're going to do is we're going to pull it out, and we're going to flatten it into a rectangle. You can roll it out. I'm just going to press it out because it's a lot easier. And since it's got the oil on it, you don't really have to worry about it sticking. Since we're making fingers with it, you don't have to be too precise. Fingers aren't all that precise. But you also don't want them too big or too thick, unless you're trying to make giant fingers, which is totally fine. But you're just going to want to kind of stretch it out. It's nice and stretchy, and it's not sticking to your hands at this point. So I'm just going to cut it into about finger sizes. A little bit bigger, but they'll be shaped a bit more, so it'll work out. Okay. So once you've got them cut to about the right size, you're just going to make them kind of more finger looking here. You can put a couple, divots for knuckle in, maybe some scratch marks on it, whatever. And you're going to make a little divot on there, because once we get them all lined up on our baking tray, we will put garlic cloves on there for a fingernail. So I'm going to shape these all and then get back to you. Alright, so now that I've got them all shaped and I've got the nails on there, so these are just little garlic cloves that I cut into shape and pressed in. So we are going to brush some butter on to all these, and then we're going to top it with some garlic salt, parsley, and Parmesan cheese to make them all yummy and garlicky before we stick them in the oven. You can see they're getting a bit puffy because they're rising still while I'm doing this. So, especially since I'm doing this by the stove, so they're nice and warm. So we're just going to make sure that we do this as quickly as possible. Right. Once that happens, you can put them in the oven for 12 to 15 minutes or until they're golden brown. Alright, so while the breadsticks are in the oven, I have taken the meatloaf mix out of the fridge, and I'm going to shape it into a zombie skull at this point. So it needs to be 3-4 inches tall and somewhat in the shape of a skull. So we are going to drape bacon across it for across its face. And we're going to try and cover most of the face with this. There's no real rhyme or reason in which to do this. You just kind of drape it across however you feel like. And make sure to tuck in your ends. Once your zombie's covered, you're going to take some onion rounds that I already cut and just kind of stick them on there for eyes. And we got some teeth here as well. And then we're going to stick whole cloves in the center of the eyes, kind of like we did with the apples, just to give it a bit more depth. Yeah. So we just need little pieces here, just to kind of put those over the top so that they don't get burned. And as soon as the breadsticks come out of the oven in just a couple minutes, we are going to turn the oven down to 325 and bake it. Now that the breadsticks have come out of the oven and the meatloaf has gone in, I turned down the oven as soon as the breadsticks came out to 325 from the 375. I am also going to do the apple cider that we started a while ago. So I have it on the stove here, right there, and all I gotta do is turn it on to a low heat, and just let it simmer for about as long as the meatloaf is in the oven. And then when we're done, we'll fish out the cinnamon sticks and everything, and we're gonna do a bit more with our frosting now. We're gonna start off with beating our butter until it's nice and smooth and creamy, and then adding the sugar and vanilla, and then the roux that we made earlier, we'll add that in afterwards, and then beat the whole thing together. So I'm not gonna film most of the beating because honestly it's loud and I think you can figure it out, but beat it well with an electric. All right, so once the butter, sugar, and vanilla have reached kind of a fluffy consistency, you're going to add the roux that you made earlier. It should be cooled to room temperature by now. You're just going to add it in there, and then you're going to beat it for about 5 minutes until it's really smooth and it's whiter in color. All right, once the frosting is really smooth and white and everything like that, you're going to scoop it into a container and actually put it in the fridge for a few minutes before you can use it, because it's kind of liquidy right now because you did a good job of melting all the butter and everything. So you're going to want to put it in the fridge to set back up a little bit before you start to use it. All right, so our breadsticks that are come out of the oven, I'm going to dip that end that is not the nail end in some marinara or pizza sauce or whatever you happen to have, red sauce, just to give it that little extra bit of looking like a finger that is now laying on a plate of yours. So you serve it with your dipping sauce as well, so that if you want to continue dipping it, you can go. All right, so once our apple cider has gotten nice and hot, we're going to fish out all of the orange peel and the cinnamon sticks that are in there. Add the lemon juice that you dipped the apples in. And if you want to add rum or spiced whiskey or anything like that, you can feel like you can, go right ahead. But if you have children or you are a child, please don't add the rum and just leave it as the apple cider. You have your apple cider in your whatever container you want to serve it in. You can go ahead and float your apple skulls in there, whichever ones you choose. And when you serve it in people's cups, you top it with the other ones that are not currently floating in there, because your bowl can only hold so many. Alright, as you can see, our zombie head just came out of the oven. Its eyes and its teeth are still intact and everything like that, so we're going to let it cool for a minute before we try and transfer it to a serving platter, just because it's that hot. But there's your zombie head out of the oven. Finally, we're almost at the end of this massive marathon of cooking. All we have left to do is frost and decorate the cupcakes and put them on a serving tray. Yay! So, as you can see, we've got our cupcakes. They're nice and cool. We've got our frosting over here. So, I mean, you can kind of decorate it however you want. You know, probably simple is going to be best, just because you are going to be putting the broken glass, sugar glass in there, as well as the fake blood on it, and you don't want it to get too busy because any design is really just going to kind of get destroyed. So I'm just going to do a simple top to this where it's just kind of flat, so that we can have everything else be the star of the show. So I'll do these and then I'll get to decorating them. Alright, so once you've got your cupcakes all nice and frosted and everything, you can take some of the broken sugar glass that you made and stick it in the top there, just however you so desire. Big shards, little shards, doesn't matter. And then you're going to drizzle some of your fake blood over the top of it. And it'll be a bit runny, bit oozy, but that's alright. It's blood. It does that. And then once you finish all of these, you'll be done. Alright, so there you have it, everybody. There's your Halloween feast. 6 dishes in, I did it in one day. I would honestly recommend doing at least the meringues the night before. I hope that you enjoyed this and that you have a good Halloween, and stay safe and stay healthy, everybody.